Hey guys, so I want to LRD chapters 2 and 3. Remember, this is our listen, read, discuss portion of the book. We did not get a chance to read or talk about chapter 2 yesterday, so I figured making a video would help us to ease through these two chapters pretty quickly. So let's start with chapter 2. Chapter 2 is called Three Old Ladies Knit the Socks of Death. Okay, so in this chapter, some interesting things happen. And Percy starts the chapter by saying he's used to weird experiences. So that lets us know that there's going to be some very weird experiences. He goes on to say that life is like a 24/7 hallucination that affects him with visions or imaginary perceptions. It's like he's seeing things. Remember, in the last chapter, Mrs. Dodds vaporized on their trip to the museum, and he's saying that the new teacher that took her place is kind of like she's always been there. Well, Percy begins to talk about the weather, and he's like, this is not normal weather. He says it's cold, and then there's thunderstorms, and then there's tornadoes, and this is totally not normal for New York. Remember, that's where he lives. So Percy is in his room, and he starts getting cranky and irritable, and his grades begin to drop, and he all of a sudden has a confrontation with his teacher, okay? Why does Percy do this? Because he's frustrated. So Percy is studying in his room for his Latin class, okay? Well, he gets so frustrated, he picks up the book and throws it across the room. Because remember, he's dyslexic, and it says in the book, in this chapter, that it's like the words were swimming off the page and circling in his head. And remember, this is an example of personification. I know we haven't learned much about that, but I did want to point it out, okay? So he's frustrated and he throws his book. Well, Percy decides to go talk to Mr. Brunner. He wants to impress him about what he does know and what he did remember. Well, let's go to the next slide. All of a sudden, Percy hears somebody talking to Mr. Brunner, and he realizes that it's his best friend, Grover. And all of a sudden, they mention a summer solstice. And Percy lets them know that he is there listening. Okay? Well, these things are important in this chapter. Okay? And this tells us a little bit about the characters. So we know Mr. Brunner and Grover are trying to keep something from Percy. And Percy has no idea what it is. Okay? Well, Percy decides to leave Yancey Academy for the summer, and Grover goes with him. So they both get on the Greyhound bus and head for home, okay? Grover tells Percy several things in this chapter. Well, on their way home, they pass a fruit stand, and beside this fruit stand, there are three ladies knitting a huge pair of socks, which is very strange, okay? But Percy believes that it might be some sort of superstition, which is bad luck. So let's go to the next slide and we'll talk about the bad luck, superstition. So if we think that superstition and we have a coffin here, what could it foreshadow? Probably something to do with death, or maybe something is going to happen in chapter 3. So let's discuss chapter 3. Moving on. Chapter 3 is called Grover Unexpectedly Loses His Pants. Okay? Well, at the beginning of the chapter, Percy confesses that he ditched Grover as soon as they got to the bus terminal. He says Grover was upset, and when Grover gets upset, he really has to go to the bathroom, and his bladder acts up. Okay? Well, this gave Percy the chance to ditch him and get rid of him. So instead of taking the bus, he catches a taxi. Okay? Here we meet Percy's mother and a little bit about his stepfather. And Percy is not so fond of his stepfather. Percy feels uneasy being at home. Okay? He remembers how Grover made him promise he wouldn't go home without him. So why was Grover so worried? Okay? Why didn't Grover want Percy to go home without him? Well, then we really get to meet Percy's mom, and she is really sweet. And Percy says that she smells good and she works hard and she's a nice person. But Percy's stepfather treats his mother poorly. He always bosses her around. Why did she marry him? That's a question we'll learn more about later in the book. So Percy tries to tell his mom about the trip to the museum and all kinds of stuff. But he realizes he can't tell her about Mrs. Dodds. Well, all of a sudden, Percy's mom surprises him and says, "Okay, Percy, we are going on a vacation. There is a cabin at Montauk that they love to go to." Well, at one point, Percy is thinking that he would like to kick Gabe and make him sing soprano. That would make him sing really, really high, okay? Just because he's so frustrated about Gabe. Well, Gabe ends up letting Percy and his mother borrow his '78 Camaro, okay? And they head out to the cabin at Montauk. All right. Well, then something happens on their way to the cabin, and then this is what we will get into more tomorrow. But in these chapters, I want you to focus on your pronouns. So as you read, I want you to find subject and object pronouns and use your little sticky notes to flag a pronoun every time you see it. And then on your sheet of notebook paper, you're going to make a list of 5 sentences that use these subject and object pronouns. And remember, you could possibly have a subject and an object pronoun in one sentence. But make a list of 5, underline your verbs, and circle your pronouns. And that is our activity today. Remember, your expectations are on the board, and your specific pages that you need to read today are listed on the board. So follow the instructions on the board and make sure that you're going step by step. If you have any questions, raise your hand.